In front of you are the exhibits of a personal exhibition, predominantly featuring portraits. How much would you be willing to pay for this portrait? And what about this one? Incidentally, all of these have been painted from real individuals. This woman, for instance, is named Jane. A remarkable coincidence indeed. Interestingly, they all share the same surname, Doe. This is because, in the United States, the name Jane Doe is used to refer to deceased women whose identities remain unknown. It's akin to the surname Snow in Game of Thrones, given to all those without known lineage. But what truly piques one's curiosity is the identity of the artist who painted all these portraits, Samuel Little, an amateur painter and concurrently a serial killer. It was once believed he had only 3 victims. However, in his later years, while imprisoned, he confessed to 93 murders. All these women were his victims. He sketched them from memory, recalling details of their encounters and in some cases even their real names. The FBI matched his confessions with unidentified bodies, finding numerous correlations. He wasn't executed, nor was he sentenced to the electric chair or poisoned. He died a natural death from heart disease at the age of 80, surrounded by a certain notoriety shared by the most prolific serial killers in the USA. He passed away just like any ordinary grandfather, albeit a notorious one. And here lies my bewilderment. Does karma exist or not? The FBI has proven Samuel's involvement in 50 murders and is now gathering the rest of the Doe sisters' gallery from across all states. Thus, the real value of each portrait equates to 1 human life. Samuel Little perpetually wrought evil, attracting attention for lesser crimes while evading suspicion for the more heinous ones. Why do they do it? I refer to serial killers. What must break within a person for them to discover such a calling within themselves? This episode will contain numerous prohibited words, and as a result, YouTube might recommend it less frequently. Therefore, we kindly ask you to like and comment if it's not too much trouble. We will delve into the darkest corners of the mind of some of the most terrifying beings on the planet and attempt to discern whether there's any logic or purpose to their actions, or is it merely madness and chaos. You are about to delve into the psyche of a maniac, exploring what is absent therein. Is it possible to identify a maniac during their childhood or amidst the crowds that surround us? Why do some individuals resort to cannibalism, consuming their own kind? Which country is notorious for producing the most diligent maniacs? Among us, how many can be classified as psychopaths, and should they fear themselves? How many werewolves prowled through medieval Europe? Who has established the bloodiest record across all times and peoples? Are murderers born, or do they become through circumstances? Is it true that all maniacs harbor a desire to be apprehended? And the most critical question of all, why do they kill? What exactly defines a serial killer or maniac? How many victims must one claim to earn such a title? What are your thoughts? 3, 5, perhaps 10. In reality, a person could annihilate 100 of their kind without being labeled a serial killer if they commit these horrors too swiftly. A distinction is made between mass murderers and serial killers. A mass murderer takes several lives in a single episode at one location, whereas a serial killer commits 2 or more crimes with significant intervals between them. These intervals are a hallmark of serial killers, unlike mass murderers, who claim as many lives as they can in one go. Therefore, individuals responsible for school shootings cannot be classified as serial killers, nor can hired assassins. They do not select their victims based on personal motives. Someone else always makes the choice for them. The term maniac stems from the word mania. It is more accurate to describe someone with, for example, a grandiosity mania or a persecution mania. A person who has committed rape is referred to as a sexual maniac. However, the press and the public have conflated these two terms. Thus, serial killers have also come to be known as maniacs. For simplicity's sake, in this video, we will equate these two concepts. Serial killers and maniacs represent a significant challenge for the police, necessitating thorough investigations. Consequently, the police sometimes hesitate to link episodes into a single series. At times, they may fail to recognize a similar modus operandi across multiple murders or make errors, causing investigations to drag on for years. For instance, Andre Chikatilo was apprehended by the police multiple times for harassing women in public. In his briefcase, they found a coil of rope, Vaseline, and a knife, typical tools of a maniac, to bind, to rape, to kill. Yet, he managed to provide explanations. He claimed the rope was for tying boxes, the knife for cutting the rope, and the Vaseline for shaving purposes. Moreover, a mistakenly conducted analysis of biological material led to the establishment of his innocence. Chikatilo was released, and 3 years later, he even volunteered in a special operation, aiding in the hunt for himself. Indeed, due to such oversights, it becomes challenging to accurately ascertain the total number of maniacs throughout history. One might argue that there should have been a greater prevalence of such figures before the 20th century. This is because, at that time, forensic science, fingerprint analysis, surveillance cameras, and databases were non-existent. Furthermore, prior to the 19th century, not every street was illuminated. It would seem that one could commit murder with impunity, unnoticed by all except perhaps cats and owls, though these creatures are hardly likely to report to the police as witnesses. Paradoxically, it was somewhat easier to apprehend maniacs in earlier times, simply because communities in villages and small towns were closely knit and everyone knew each other. When a maniac was caught, they were often lynched immediately, without the benefit of a trial or investigation. Historically, only individuals of considerable power could afford the luxury of becoming serial maniacs. Take, for example, the infamous Countess Elizabeth Bathory. No, she certainly did not bathe in the blood of virgins. That is a myth. However, according to witness testimonies, she murdered up to 650 young women. In Russia, the noblewoman Daria Saltykova, known as Saltychika, gained notoriety. She was subjected to a public trial for the sophisticated torture and murder of 38 serfs, though rumors suggested the number of victims could be as high as 139. Such cases have entered the annals of history, whereas serial killers from the lower classes rarely received mass attention. This was a time devoid of press coverage or a formal police force, which only emerged in the 15th century. One of the institutions of the era in Europe was the Inquisition. People would capture red-haired women, weigh them, and declare them witches if they weighed less than 50 kilograms, under the belief that anyone under this weight could take flight on a broomstick, as a broom lacked the power to lift anything heavier. It was, after all, no motorcycle. Those accused were then burned at the stake, with such trials numbering between 40,000 and 100,000. However, records from the same era also document around 300 trials of werewolves. These were true monsters, predators of the night, but instead of fur and claws, they wielded knives and ropes. In 1589, Peter Stump, known as the Werewolf of Bedburg, was accused of making a pact with the devil. Allegedly, he gained the ability to transform into a wolf, in which guise he raped, murdered, and consumed humans. His contemporaries included the werewolves of Dole and Poligny. All of these individuals were serial killers, though formally, they were tried for witchcraft. In those times, it was easier for people to believe that a person had been possessed by the devil, rather than accept that someone could commit such atrocities of their own volition and then repeat such acts 17 more times. Surely the devil must have been involved. The task of apprehending serial killers became markedly more complex from the mid-19th century onwards, as urbanization, the mass migration to cities, bestowed upon humanity a cloak of anonymity. A medieval city dweller might encounter only 100 strangers in their lifetime, whereas by the 19th century, individuals would meet hundreds of strangers every day. Consider the observation made by the Globe newspaper in London during the era of Jack the Ripper in 1888. A man in the East End is as inconspicuous as a grain of sand, virtually indistinguishable from the mass around him. A society comprised of indifferent strangers and unfamiliar faces. Who follows you into a dark alleyway? Is it a neighbor or a stranger? This description feels familiar, does it not? We live in such a society today, but its origins trace back to the 19th century. Jack the Ripper emerged as the first murderer to captivate the media's attention. The telegraph served as the Victorian era's internet, with news of each of Jack's murders spreading instantaneously and being reprinted across the country. Though he claimed only 5 victims, not nearly as prolific as Samuel Little, who was responsible for 93 deaths. By this time, news across Europe began to feature serial mutilators who killed for pleasure. Martin Dumoulard in France lured young women to their deaths under the guise of offering them jobs as maids. In Italy, the butcher Giorgio Orsolano chopped up children and discarded them in a stream. Meanwhile, Manuel Romasanta guided people through the mountain passes in Spain, only to return without them. These individuals were also branded as werewolves, but today, they are the subject of psychiatric study and analysis. The 20th century saw an explosion of maniacal killers in the USA, dubbed the Golden Age of serial killers. Observe the dramatic increase in the number of serial killers from 1960 to 1990. What societal shifts occurred that led to such a drastic self-destructive behavior? In the 1970s, Americans embarked on constructing the most expensive mega project since the building of the Egyptian pyramids, the interstate highway system. This infrastructure became an ideal tool for serial killers, allowing them to traverse states and pick up unsuspecting hitchhikers as easy prey. Furthermore, the expansion of the road network contributed to suburban sprawl, and entire neighborhoods transformed into ghettos, veritable crime factories. These developments created a perfect hunting ground for serial killers. Thus, America inadvertently provided serial killers with the freedom to roam via the highway system and easy targets in the form of suburban dwellers and hitchhikers. However, the most prolific killer did not hail from the USA but from a country where ghettos were even more prevalent. Here are the top 5 record holders for the number of proven victims, 3 of whom are from the same country: Pedro Lopez, Daniel Barbosa, and Luis Garavito. These individuals are Latin Americans originating from Colombia. Luis Garavito, who appeared as an ordinary bus driver, raped and murdered 138 boys. What was his secret? Marginalization, meaning the emergence of a large number of people from the lower echelons of society. The impoverished and unemployed became easy victims, overlooked and unsearched for. Amidst the backdrop of wars with rebels and cartels, murders in Colombia became commonplace, and the victims of Luis Garavito in impoverished areas went unnoticed. Similar to Russia in the 1990s, the police were preoccupied with car bombings and murders for profit, causing serial killings to be lost in the statistics. In Angarsk, where the maniac Mikhail Popkov hunted from 1990 to 2008, at least 12 people were killed daily due to crime or domestic issues. Okay, we've understood that a serial killer is not necessarily the charismatic white male often portrayed in cinema. He could be Colombian, Asian, black, anyone. But let's attempt to construct a portrait of the typical killer. What does he drive? Where does he live? How does he earn a living? What does he look like? Does he have a basement lined with polyethylene and equipped with torture tools at his home? You might have noticed I've consistently used he. Indeed, let's first address gender characteristics. If you believe that there are significantly more male serial killers than female ones, you are correct. For instance, in the USA a century ago, there were twice as many male maniacs as female. Now, the ratio has widened to tenfold. It seems logical, given men are often perceived as more brutish, less emotional, and thus more easily envisioned wielding a knife in a dark alley. However, evolutionary psychology can explain these gender differences without resorting to cliches about weaker or stronger sexes. It turns out that 65% of male murderers stalked their victims in a manner akin to ancient hunters. They pursued their prey, whereas only 4% of women exhibited this behavior. Women typically did not stalk, but identified potential targets within their surroundings, killing strangers 6 times less frequently compared to men. Women most often commit their crimes at home or work, preferring poisons in half of the cases, historically because women have been inclined towards gathering resources near the home. According to psychologist Marissa Harrison, it is these ancient archetypes, men as hunters and women as gatherers, that continue to influence the modus operandi of crimes. There are exceptions to this rule. Criminology does not tolerate sexism. Maria Petrova instilled fear in Moscow's Zuzino district in the early 2000s. She would simply step outside and slit the throat of any man she encountered in public places as retribution for the harassment she faced from men. Regarding the question of occupation, what does a serial killer do in their downtime when not engaged in criminal activities? The FBI posits that the ideal profession for a serial killer is that of a truck driver. This role allows them to disperse their victims across various regions without arousing suspicion. Truck drivers came under the FBI's scrutiny a decade ago when an alarmingly high number of murdered women were discovered along the Interstate 40. Across all major highways in the USA, the police have identified over 750 victims, leading to the discovery of 400 suspects, 50 of whom were truck drivers. This includes the elusive Dr. No, who targeted roadside sex workers, some of whom considered him a regular yet unwelcome client. However, the most unsettling fact is that despite the allure of travel, 74% of serial killers choose their victims close to home, within their own cities. They are capable of committing heinous acts only to walk a few blocks home and sleep peacefully in their own beds, possibly even beside their spouse. Yes, the image of the reclusive lone wolf killer is merely a stereotype. Many maniacs have families and lead double lives. Robert Yates had a wife and 5 children. He served as a helicopter pilot in the United States National Guard and was a decorated serviceman. Yet this is only one facet of his life. On the darker side, he murdered 16 sex workers in the 1990s, one of whom he buried in his own backyard, right under his bedroom window. Look at this. Everyone is smiling. Everyone appears happy. Yet there's something unsettling about his gaze. Could it be that such individuals exhibit certain maniacal traits in their appearance? Not necessarily. Consider the most notorious of Russia's uncaught killers, Valery Andreev, known as the Orsk maniac. He is among Interpol's most wanted criminals, yet to an observer, he appears to be an ordinary man, the kind you might pass by 10 times a day. Then there's the 1978 episode of The Dating Game, where a woman searches for a future husband by questioning 3 bachelors, sight unseen. She chose Rodney Alcala, who was witty and charming, eliciting applause from the audience. However, she declined to go on a date with him after the show, a decision that may have saved her life. At the time of filming, Alcala had already murdered at least 2 women. Some of you may find yourselves disheartened, for I had promised to present a photograph of a typical maniac, yet I assert that such an individual could be anyone, often resembling a model family person. This precisely is the message I wish to convey. A maniac cannot be distinguished in a crowd. He does not wildly roll his eyes, nor does a knife protrude from beneath his coat. No, even after engaging with him, you are likely to remain oblivious. This is not because he is exceptionally intelligent or maintains composure as depicted in films, where serial killers are portrayed as erudite, art-savvy individuals with superior intellect. In reality, maniacs possess an average IQ of 94 to 95, akin to that of the average person. This is conspicuously reflected in their choice of weapons. The typical arsenal we associate with maniacs comprises knives and strangulation tools. Even the selection of poisons is made by those of relatively average intellect. Truly intelligent individuals prefer bombs, but they are a rare breed. Hence, the success of maniacs does not lie in their intelligence, but in their obsession, planning, and often psychopathy. Psychopath. What does that term even imply? Does it denote someone insane or irrational? No, it does not. Being irrational refers to an individual unaware of the nature of their crimes, perhaps due to schizophrenia. Psychopaths, on the contrary, are fully aware of their actions. Thus, the question should not be about what enables them to commit crimes cold-bloodedly, without remorse. The correct question is, what are they lacking? Psychopaths are indifferent to the emotions of others. They simply lack empathy. They are incapable of compassion regardless of the subject. A child, an injured puppy, a person in their trunk. Yes, to us, they might not seem like complete individuals, but psychopathy endows them with a range of traits, both detrimental and advantageous. These include charm and social agility, manipulative skills, absence of guilt, pathological lying, inflated self-esteem, a craving for new sensations, a parasitic lifestyle, impulsiveness, lack of long-term planning, and so on. Many of you might now be thinking, "Oh my God, this describes me." If you've just self-diagnosed with psychopathy, then mark your comment with this emoji and we shall report you to the FBI. This statement, of course, is made in jest. However, you might not be far from the truth. considering that psychopaths constitute approximately 1% of the global population. There exists a diagnostic tool known as the psychopathy checklist, in which each characteristic is rated on a scale from 0 to 2. Should one accumulate a score between 30 and 40 points on this checklist, they would be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. You can, of course, attempt this test yourself via a link in the description. However, it would be more accurate if the assessment were conducted by a psychiatrist. This is because self-evaluation may yield a somewhat skewed score, likely resulting in inaccurate outcomes, though I suspect this warning won't deter you. I understand. The truth, however, is that significantly more than 1% of the population exhibits psychopathic traits. Yet, these traits are not pronounced enough to warrant a clinical diagnosis, given that psychopathy exists on a spectrum. This means that some individuals are more psychopathic than others. Consider an extreme case. Ted Bundy, an icon of American pop culture associated with serial killers, is a clear example of a psychopath. According to the checklist, he scored 39 out of 40 points. A psychiatrist who studied MRI scans of dozens of murderers and psychopaths, identifying reduced activity in the same brain region among them. He then stumbled upon another scan showcasing the most pronounced deviation yet. This is a true psychopath, he thought, only to discover it was his own scan. Now, in all his presentations, he jokes,
"I'm not a full categorical psychopath. I'm what you call a pro-social psychopath."
Such individuals, through their charisma and manipulative skills, can achieve great career success without shedding a single drop of blood. The creator of the aforementioned psychopathy test calculated that among company directors, psychopaths are almost 4 times as common as in the general planet population. Not all psychopaths are serial killers, just as not all serial killers are psychopaths. But is there a singular shared flaw in the brain of maniacs that renders them so? Geneticists have embarked on an inquiry in this direction. In 1978, a woman from the Netherlands sought medical advice with a peculiar concern. All the men in her family were murderers and rapists. She feared her descendants would perpetuate this grim legacy. The doctors collected DNA samples from her relatives and discovered a shared mutation in the MAOA gene, which disrupts the balance of serotonin in the brain, rendering an individual impulsive. The press swiftly dubbed this the warrior gene, attributing aggressive behavior to its influence. However, a detailed observation of over 500 individuals from childhood to adulthood introduces a critical nuance. Indeed, this mutation predisposes individuals to aggression, but only under conditions of severe maltreatment during childhood. Faulty genetics is akin to a loaded gun, whereas psychological trauma acts as the trigger. Thus, the aggression of a criminal is the culmination of humiliation and abuse experienced in childhood. Future parents, please heed this part with utmost attention. It is impermissible to beat and mistreat your children. Veterans of World War II and Vietnam returned home bearing the scars of post-traumatic stress disorder, characterized by alcoholism, outbursts, and fits of rage. Many children raised in such environments from the 1950s to the 1970s were subjected to this form of upbringing, which, in turn, led them to kill. This could have been another contributing factor to the onset of the golden age of serial killers in the United States. But what else do you think can shape the mind of a killer? Traumas, indeed, it seems quite evident. Physical brain injuries, not only those caused by blunt force, but also illnesses, such as meningitis, which involves the inflammation of the brain's protective membranes. Among all serial killers, approximately 20% have sustained head injuries. The majority of serial killers embark on their bloody journey when 2 or more of these factors converge within a single biography. Enduring all these factors concurrently in one lifetime is unlikely for most. Yet, for those who do, the result is the emergence of such notorious individuals. Richard Ramirez, infamously known as the Night Stalker, suffered a frontal lobe injury at the age of 2 while attempting to climb a dresser, followed by several more injuries thereafter. He was raised in an environment rife with domestic violence, where his cousin, a Vietnam War veteran suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, shared graphic tales of beheading Vietnamese women and displayed photographs of the acts. Subsequently, this same cousin fatally shot his wife in front of Ramirez. The combination of brain trauma, domestic abuse, close association with an actual maniac, witness to a murder, and a psychopathy score exceeding 30 points seemingly left this young man with no chance of leading a normal life. We have addressed the question of how individuals become serial killers. Now, it is time to tackle the principal inquiry. Why do they kill? What motivates them? The most widely recognized classification was devised by criminologists Holmes and DeBurger, the former bearing a surname perfectly suited for his profession. According to their analysis, there are 4 primary motives: psychosis, mission, thrill, and power. Based on these motives, all maniacs can be categorized into 4 types. The first is the visionary, comprising less than 1% of all maniacs. Afflicted with mental disorders such as schizophrenia, they hear voices and see visions that compel them to kill. Whether it's the voice of God, the devil, or some other entity is irrelevant. A classic example is Herbert Mullen, who believed the voices in his head commanded him to sacrifice people to prevent California from experiencing earthquakes and floods. For visionaries, the brain plays a cruel trick. The situation is straightforward. These are sick individuals in need of treatment, which may or may not be effective. The next type is the missionary, who believes they have a clear mission to cleanse the planet of those they deem unworthy. For instance, Jack the Ripper murdered prostitutes, Joseph Paul Franklin targeted Jews and African Americans, and Alexander Pichushkin sought to rid the world of alcoholics and social outcasts. Pichushkin aimed to fill each square of a chessboard with his victims and fell just short of the final 64th square. Here are his last words: "These days, a vast number of people are deciding my fate. Police, detectives, judges, prosecutors, jurors, experts. Yet I alone decided the fates of 63 people. I alone served as their prosecutor, juror, judge, and executioner, fulfilling all your roles. I was almost a god." While visionaries merely converse with a deity, missionaries consider themselves deities. The third category of maniacs encompasses hedonists, individuals who derive pleasure from the act of killing. Some find gratification in the execution of the most perverse rapes, while others delight in sadism and torture. Stemming from childhood trauma, they develop certain fantasies. Many people harbor fantasies of engaging in sexual activities in unconventional places like a store dressing room or a movie theater, or fantasies involving bondage. Jerry Brudos, for instance, adorned the feet of the women he killed with shoes, feeding his fetish. He even attempted to resuscitate one of his victims with electricity, aroused by the sight of the shoes flying off her feet due to the electric shock. Edmund Kemper, who murdered female students, fantasized they were his mother, who had tormented him throughout his childhood, rehearsing his sweet revenge. Hedonists are tormented by an insatiable itch, a burning desire to bring their fantasies to life. Yet they are unable to achieve the perfect scenario that exists in their minds. All they manage is to temporarily soothe their itch. During a period of calm, Edmund Kemper, who eventually killed his own mother, became disillusioned and subsequently surrendered to the authorities. Hedonists also include those who kill for gain and comfort, deriving pleasure from their actions. A notable example is the Soviet poisoner Tamara Ivanyutina, who laced food with a toxic thallium solution, killing 9 people, including 2 husbands, and hospitalizing 13 others. Her motive was to acquire real estate, money, possessions, and to eliminate those who stood in her way. Her actions so shocked the Soviet court that she was sentenced to execution by firing squad, marking one of only 3 instances where such a sentence was handed down to a woman. Finally, we come to the last type of maniacs, the hunters. Their primary motivation is to control their victims, to feel power over them. To understand this motive, consider the interview with Jeffrey Dahmer, who killed 17 people.
I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to, I don't know how to put it, possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them?
Right, right. Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons.
The notion itself harbors a macabre resonance, yet the horror intensifies upon learning another detail. Dahmer consumed his victims. In the cinematic portrayal, Hannibal Lecter is depicted as a gourmet who savors human flesh accompanied by a glass of fine wine. In reality, cannibalism bears no relation to gastronomic preferences. For a maniac, it signifies the ultimate dominion, as the victim is literally assimilated by the perpetrator. But what of another stereotype perpetuated by cinema? The notion that maniacs kill because they subconsciously desire to be apprehended. Indeed, some have indeed left messages for the police, like Jack the Ripper, who initiated what is arguably the first recorded correspondence with law enforcement, or the Zodiac Killer, arguably the most infamous serial killer to evade capture by American law enforcement. He tantalized investigators by sending encrypted messages. One of his ciphers was only recently decoded by programmers in 2020, yet it offered no clues to his identity, only taunts. "I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me." Psychologists believe that the longer a maniac engages in murder, the more it becomes a tedious routine, prompting them to escalate the stakes. Feeling invincible, they start to cover their tracks with less care, not because they wish to be caught, but rather they believe they are uncatchable and begin to make mistakes. Furthermore, there's another motive that might be found across all four types of maniacs: a craving for attention. Dennis Rader, who gave himself the moniker BTK, bind, torture, kill, killed for the sense of power it gave him. Yet, he reached out to a television station with a letter inquiring, "How many people do I have to kill before I get my name in the newspapers or some national attention?" His penchant for playing games ultimately led to his downfall. He once sent a floppy disk to the television station to see if it could lead to his capture. Indeed, the police were able to examine the metadata on the document contained in the disk and successfully identify him. Indeed, there exists a plethora of motives behind such heinous acts. Yet, if these individuals are so abhorrent, why does society engage in extensive discourse about them, ponder over their actions, and share their blood-curdling narratives? It's time to acknowledge a grim reality. Society is fascinated by maniacs. This fascination fuels the production of numerous books and films about them. Some individuals even attempt to capitalize on their notoriety, given the existing demand. Many people not only follow the stories of maniacs, but also collect their artifacts. For instance, an autoportrait by the maniac clown John Wayne Gacy was purchased at auction for $7,500. On the website Serial Killers Inc., one can acquire letters from maniacs, postcards, locks of their hair, confessions, blood-stained photos from crime scenes, and even a charming drawing by Richard Ramirez, known for terrorizing America with various weapons, complete with Ramirez's own signature in excellent condition. Then there's the individual who revels in personally photographing himself with maniacs and collecting items autographed by them. His prized possession is an urn containing the ashes of a serial killer who also happens to be his beloved grandmother. Indeed, this represents a vicious cycle. We are mesmerized by maniacs, and they, in turn, derive pleasure from our fascination. In response to this phenomenon, the United States enacted the Son of Sam law, named after the moniker of maniac David Berkowitz, who claimed his crimes were commanded by a dog. Following his capture, rumors circulated that he would sell his story to filmmakers. Now, in several states, criminals are prohibited from profiting from books or movie scripts about their deeds. When serial killings are discussed, and the killers themselves appear in interviews, it might seem as if maniacs are ubiquitous. Paradoxically, while serial killers have been increasingly mentioned on YouTube, in films and books, the actual number of maniacs has decreased by 85% compared to their so-called golden age. This is unsurprising, as in recent decades, our society has transformed into a panopticon. Cameras are everywhere, connected to a unified database. Faces and mobile signals are tracked, and an individual can be identified from a mere gram of genetic material, leading to more frequent apprehension of murderers. Another significant factor is pornography. Yes, the availability of pornography, even of the most perverse nature, allows individuals with sadistic tendencies to find an outlet. It's simpler to engage with content on a screen at home than to commit acts of violence against others. But then, one might wonder, how many maniacs remain at large? How many are actively committing crimes at this very moment? Approximately 30 maniacs were operational in the United States just 5 years ago, and their numbers have been steadily declining. But how many have evaded capture altogether? This poses an intriguing query, the answer to which may seem elusive. Or is it? There are few challenges that scientists with the aid of models cannot quantify. Their findings are astonishing. Roughly 7 serial killers who were active in the United States during the 20th century were never apprehended and died without facing justice. While this estimate is admittedly rough and specific to America, it provides crucial insight into how few murderers manage to initiate a spree and remain hidden for an extended period. Today, the likelihood of falling victim to a maniac is astronomically low. However, it is not zero. The probability is approximately this figure. But does even such a minuscule chance offer us reassurance? No. We continue to harbor a fear of maniacs, for fearing them is a natural response. Our desire to learn more about these individuals stems from an instinct to better understand the threats we face. We observe serial killers in much the same way early humans would have watched a snake in the grass, observing with fear, but recognizing that losing sight of it and accidentally encountering it within our own habitat is far more terrifying. Thank you for watching the video. If you have questions, write them in the comments. And also check out our channel, we have some more interesting videos.